Have you ever heard about the president whose brain went missing? Or what about the one that was inducted in the Wrestling Hall of Fame? How about the guy that never voted in a presidential election except for his own? Welcome everyone, my name is Bay State History, and today we'll be going over 7 random facts for all 47 presidents in United States history. That's 329 facts total, and yes, I will be giving 7 extra facts for Presidents Cleveland and Trump because they were technically president twice each. The more facts, the merrier, right? If this concept sounds familiar to my older viewers, it's because when I started this channel, I made a series of YouTube shorts with each entry being 7 facts about a president. I got all the way up to Cleveland, but I decided to pivot in the direction of long form on this channel, so the first half of this video might sound a little familiar to those of you who have seen all those shorts. In this video, I'm going to try to go for the weird and obscure as much as possible, not the basic stuff you'd read in your 5th grade history textbook. If you're up to the challenge, leave a comment below with how many of these facts you knew beforehand. Anyways, without further ado, let's learn 7 facts about all 47 presidents. George Washington. Starting off with George Washington, everyone's heard the story about his wooden teeth, but just like the cherry tree myth, this one isn't true. They were actually a mix of ivory, animal, and human teeth, likely belonging originally to enslaved people. This was actually relatively common among the elite at the time. The only country he ever visited other than the United States was Barbados. He's Confederate General Robert E. Lee's step-great-grandfather-in-law. He was the first mule breeder in America. In his youth, Washington was actually a redhead. One of his favorite dogs was named Sweet Lips, and that name was given by Washington himself. He was the only president to never live in the White House, instead living first in New York and then later in Philadelphia for most of his presidency. John Adams. John Adams, our second president, defended the British in the court case about the Boston Massacre. No, he didn't necessarily believe what they did was right, but he did believe in a free and fair trial for everyone involved. He stole a small piece of Shakespeare's wooden chair from his home in England when he visited with his good friend Thomas Jefferson. He actually had a lisp because he refused to wear dentures. From 1802 to 2001, he held the record of longest-lived president. When Ronald Reagan exceeded his age, he took the record, but now it belongs to Jimmy Carter. John Adams and fellow founding father Sam Adams were second cousins. He was the only founding father president to never own a slave and was also the only founding father president to not be from Virginia. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson popularized mac and cheese in the United States after going to France and loving it there. He was also a big-time fossil collector. Jefferson tried to get with his friend John Walker's wife, Betsy, after they had been married. He loved constantly humming and singing to himself. He also had extreme anxiety about public speaking. He owned a mockingbird named Dick that he let eat from his hand. His nickname was Long Tom because he was 6'2", and the average height in 1775 was just about 5'6". James Madison. To research writing the Constitution, James Madison read over 200 books that his friend Thomas Jefferson sent him from France. He was the first president to have a parent alive during his presidency, that being his mother. He was second cousins with future President Zachary Taylor. His stepson Todd gambled away most of the family fortune right after James died. Along with Thomas Jefferson, he stopped the Virginia Assembly from adopting Christianity as an official state religion of the United States. He tried and failed to create the country's first conscription during the War of 1812. He was the only president to ever be shorter than his wife. James Monroe. James Monroe attended Emperor Napoleon's coronation in 1804. The capital city of the African country Liberia is named Monrovia after him. At the age of just 18, he crossed the Delaware with George Washington and was wounded at the Battle of Trenton, almost dying. However, he was not in the same boat as Washington when crossing the Delaware, making this famous painting inaccurate. He was the final person to run unopposed in a U.S. presidential election, that being the election of 1820. Under his predecessor James Madison, he served as Secretary of War and Secretary of State at the same time. One of Monroe's presidential portraits was painted by Samuel Morse, the same guy that invented Morse code. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams skinny dipped in the Potomac River almost every morning during his presidency. The first woman to ever get an interview with the president was actually with John Quincy Adams because she took his clothes when he was in the river and refused to give them back until he fulfilled an interview. The interview story has questionable validity at best, but the skinny dipping part is 100% true. He spoke 9 languages: English, Dutch, French, German, Greek, Italian, Latin, Russian, and Spanish. He actually died inside of the U.S. Capitol building while he was serving as a representative. A strange pet that he and his wife kept during his presidency were silkworms. He temporarily partially blinded himself by looking at a solar eclipse in 1791. He took the presidential oath of office with a law book instead of a Bible. He has the oldest surviving photograph of any United States president, that being from the year 1843, but he's not the first one to be photographed. William Henry Harrison had a photograph taken in 1841, but it is unfortunately lost media now. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson had a pet parrot that had to be removed from his funeral because it kept swearing. He was also gifted a 1,400-pound wheel of cheese from a New York farmer that he left in the entrance hall of the White House on display for almost 2 years. He was the first president to experience an assassination attempt, and he beat his would-be assassin with his hickory cane and had to be peeled off of him so as not to kill the man. He was the co-founder of the Democratic Party, which is not just the oldest active party in the United States, but the entire world. Obviously, the Democratic Party of the Jacksonian era is very different than the one that we know today. He was the only president to ever pay off the national debt, and he was the only president to ever kill a man in a duel. No, it was not Aaron Burr. Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren was the first president to have a luxury toilet in his home. His administration was the one that pushed the legislation that legalized divorce in the United States. There were rumors by his political opponents, albeit with extremely weak evidence, that he was the illegitimate son of Aaron Burr. His name was originally spelt Martin Van Buren with 2 A's, which was the Dutch way of spelling it. He was born in the United States, but grew up speaking Dutch as his first language. When unsuccessfully running in the 1848 presidential election, his vice presidential pick was Charles Francis Adams, the son of former President John Quincy Adams and grandson of former President John Adams. He was the first president born after the approval of the Declaration of Independence. His post-presidency was 21 years long, and during that entire time, he never saw a president win re-election. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison's inaugural address was 8,400 words long, which is almost 4 times as long as the average throughout history. His wife, Anna Harrison, never got to see the White House because she was ill when he was inaugurated, and then he died 31 years later. She couldn't make it in time. He has never had an official definitive cause of death declared, only likely theories. He was the oldest president to ever be elected all the way until Ronald Reagan 140 years later. After he died, the news of his death took 110 days to reach Los Angeles, which was over 3 times longer than his presidency itself. Remember, Los Angeles wasn't even part of the United States at this time. He was the last president to be born as a British subject. He was the first president to travel by railroad to his inauguration in Washington, D.C. John Tyler. John Tyler had 15 children, which is the most of any president. He had 2 grandchildren who survived into the 2020s, with the younger of the 2 dying just a few months ago in May 2025 at the age of 96. He was elected to the Confederate States House of Representatives during the Civil War, but never actually served because he died before his term could start. His death was the only presidential death to never be officially recognized by Washington, D.C. because of his allegiance to the Confederacy and not the Union. At a celebration on the USS Princeton for Texas becoming part of the Union while Tyler was president, a gun exploded, killing several of his cabinet members and very nearly killing him. He was the first ever vice president to ascend to the role of president after his predecessor died in office. There was some confusion about what exactly to do here and whether he was acting president or the actual president, and we can thank Tyler for the process that we know and love today of how a vice president can become president. He could technically be considered an independent because his own party, the Whigs, kicked him out while he was president for ideological disagreements. James K. Polk. Did you know that James K. Polk banned dancing from the White House during his term as president? He was also the only former Speaker of the House to become president, which surprised me and feels like a pretty prolific role in American politics. He is the shortest post-presidency of any president, at 103 days. He was the only president that ran on the promise of only serving 1 term before he got elected, and then voluntarily stepped down after that full term was served. He was the only president to lose his birth state and residence state in the Electoral College but still win the election. His inaugural ceremony was the first to be reported by telegraph in history. When he was 17, he had to undergo surgery to remove kidney stones with no anesthesia. This likely made him infertile for life. Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor never voted in a presidential election prior to his own. His body was exhumed in 1991 to investigate claims that he had been poisoned, and you can find pictures of this on the internet, though I won't be showing them here for obvious reasons. He likely died due to an overconsumption of cherries and milk, which caused intestinal bloating and diarrhea, along with a contaminated water supply in Washington, D.C. that made him sick. He was the father-in-law of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. He was the U.S. president who fought in the most wars, with a total of 4. Those were the War of 1812, the Second Seminole War, the Black Hawk War, and the Mexican-American War. He was the final president to be born before the U.S. Constitution had been written and approved. Both major political parties, the Whigs and the Democrats, tried to get Taylor to run for them. I haven't really heard of many instances of this happening in American history, other than Eisenhower in the 1950s. Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore, along with the help of his wife Abigail, established the first White House library during his term.
His wife was also his teacher, but there was only a 2-year age difference there.
He was the final president that was neither a Republican nor a Democrat. In 1855, Queen Victoria said that Millard Fillmore was the handsomest man that she'd ever seen. I don't know about that one. He was the first president to have a father live through his entire presidency. Utah's capital used to be a town named Fillmore in Millard County, in an attempt to flatter the president. After his presidency, he joined the New York militia and personally guarded Abraham Lincoln's funeral train as it passed through Buffalo. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce was an alcoholic and drank himself to death at the young age of 64. He helped pay for Nathaniel Hawthorne's children to go to college. When the Civil War started, he proposed a meeting of all former U.S. presidents to form a new constitutional convention to overpower Abraham Lincoln. He refused to take the oath of office on a Bible, believing God was punishing him for his mistakes because of the death of his son in a train accident less than 2 months prior. He was the first president to deliver his inauguration speech by memory. Pretty impressive. He served all but 6 weeks of his term without a vice president. His VP William King died of tuberculosis early on, and back then there was no process to replace a vice president. This actually didn't come about until the 1960s with the 25th Amendment. He was the only elected president to lose his party's nomination for a second term and not willingly step down. James Buchanan. James Buchanan had the biggest age gap between a president and his running mate until Donald Trump and J.D. Vance just last year in 2024, that being 29 years between himself and John Breckinridge. Trump and Vance beat this by a decade, having 39 years between the two of them. He was the only president to never marry, and there is somewhat credible speculation to suggest that he might have been gay. Because he never married, his niece Harriet Lane fulfilled the duties of the First Lady. He was also the final president born in the 1700s. The first transatlantic telegraph message was sent to James Buchanan in 1858 by Queen Victoria. He was the final Secretary of State to later be elected president. His inauguration ceremony was the first one to be photographed. Abraham Lincoln. Now on to Abraham Lincoln. He was a member of the Wrestling Hall of Fame and is said to have only lost one match of about 300 that he participated in, and the guy he was going against might have been cheating. He was the first president to be born outside of the 13 original colonies, from Kentucky. None of Lincoln's great-grandchildren had any kids, so his direct bloodline has died out. He received less than 12 months of formal education throughout his life. That just proves that you can go on to do great things without necessarily having the best education in the world. He once received a letter from none other than Karl Marx congratulating him on winning re-election in 1864. He founded the United States Secret Service just hours before being assassinated. However, at the time, they weren't an institution to protect the president. They were instead a part of the United States Treasury to combat counterfeit money. His voice was described as high-pitched, shrill, and even unpleasant to listen to. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was actually drunk at his inauguration in 1865. He was also meant to be assassinated on the same night that Lincoln was, as part of a grander conspiracy, but his would-be assassin, George Inserote, chickened out and got drunk at a local bar. He was the only tailor to ever become president, and would often wear suits that he made himself. He was buried with a copy of the United States Constitution underneath his head. His purchase of Alaska was mocked by political opponents, referring to it as Andrew Johnson's Polar Bear Garden. He ran for the House of Representatives from Tennessee after being president, but only got third place with 20% of the vote. He was the only president to ever be impeached during the first 200 years of American history. The next one wouldn't be until the 1990s with Bill Clinton. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant's tomb is the largest mausoleum in the entire Western Hemisphere. He was the last president to own a slave, who he received as a gift from his father-in-law and chose to set free during a time where he desperately could have used the money from selling him. He was originally meant to attend the play with Lincoln where he was assassinated along with his wife, but his wife convinced him not to go because she didn't like Mrs. Lincoln. His birth name was Hiram Ulysses Grant, but he changed it to Ulysses S. Grant because, no joke, he didn't like that his initials spelled out hug. Mark Twain helped publish Grant's memoirs, which made Grant and his family the equivalent of over $14 million in today's money. He created the Department of Justice during his administration. To relieve his pain from his throat cancer later in life, he would drink red wine laced with cocaine. Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford Hayes' wife was nicknamed Lemonade Lucy because she served lemonade instead of alcohol, which Hayes refused to have inside the White House. He was the first president to speak on the telephone, and his phone number was 1. The country Paraguay honors Hayes as a national hero because he oversaw a land dispute between them and Argentina that resulted in Paraguay getting 60% of their modern territory. Paraguay even has a soccer club named after him, Club Presidente Hayes. He was the first president to appoint an African American that was confirmed by the Senate, that being Frederick Douglass as Marshal of Washington, D.C. The president's desk in the Oval Office was originally gifted to Hayes from Queen Victoria. He was the first ever president to win the electoral vote but lose the popular vote. James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield could write Latin with one hand and Greek with the other at the same time. The medical community also largely agrees that he would have survived his assassination with a more competent doctor. Alexander Graham Bell designed one of the world's first metal detectors to try to find the bullet lodged in Garfield's body. This was unsuccessful. Prior to being shot, he weighed about 210 pounds, but by the end of his life, he had become so frail and ill that he only weighed 130 pounds. He was the only president that was also an ordained minister and the only president to go directly from the House of Representatives to the presidency. Him and Vice President Chester Arthur both taught at the same school in Vermont, but at different times. Chester A. Arthur. Speaking of Chester Arthur, he had a great interest in fashion and would change clothes up to 5 times throughout the day. Some political opponents made the claim that he was actually born over the Canadian border, not northern Vermont like he said, which would have made him ineligible for president. There's no substantial evidence to prove this though. His administration was praised by none other than Mark Twain, who complimented its efficiency and competency. His wife died shortly before his presidency, so his sister, Mary, took on the duties that a first lady traditionally would. The man who killed Arthur's predecessor, James Garfield, requested a pardon from Arthur with the logic that he gave Arthur a pay raise by making him president by killing James Garfield. Yeah, I don't know about that one. He paid $300 to get out of the Civil War draft. He's the only president since George Washington to be sworn in New York City. Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was the first and only president to get married while in the White House. During his time as sheriff of Erie County, he personally carried out at least 2 executions. He had a secret surgery on his yacht to remove a tumor in his mouth. The Baby Ruth Candy Bar Company claimed that their famous treat was named after Cleveland's daughter, not the baseball player Babe Ruth, to avoid legal consequences. This likely was not true. He has a city Clevelandia named after him in Brazil for helping them with a territorial dispute. The US had a lesbian or bisexual first lady under his first administration. Before Cleveland married his wife, his sister fulfilled the duties, and she had a relationship with a widow named Evangeline Simpson. He disapproved of the US military overthrowing the Hawaiian monarchy and advocated for it to be restored. Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was the first president to have electricity in the White House and was actually so scared of getting electrocuted from touching the light switch that he would go to bed at night with the lights on. He argued an astounding 15 cases before the Supreme Court during his time as a lawyer. Helen Keller wrote a letter wishing Harrison's wife well after he announced that she was seriously ill. There is only one known photograph in existence of Benjamin Harrison without a beard. He had the first ever decorated Christmas tree in the White House dressed up as Santa Claus for his children. His second wife was his first wife's niece, and his children disowned him after making that decision. He was the final president to have a full beard while in office, over 130 years ago. Grover Cleveland. Going back to Grover Cleveland because he was technically president twice, he first met his wife, the daughter of one of his friends, when she was a newborn and he was 27. He bought her first baby carriage. Ew. One of his granddaughters was the co-inventor of the famous trolley problem. He issued more vetoes than all of his predecessors combined. He avoided the Civil War draft by paying a Polish immigrant to fight in his place. After losing the 1888 election, he held an umbrella over his successor Benjamin Harrison's head when he gave his inaugural address in a thunderstorm. From 1914 to 1929, he was on the $20 bill instead of Andrew Jackson. He met Franklin Roosevelt when Roosevelt was just 5 years old, and he told him that he should never be president because he wouldn't want the burden upon him. That advice didn't really end up playing out, did it? William McKinley. William McKinley met Winston Churchill during Churchill's first visit to America when he was just in his mid-20s. He and his wife used to babysit President Rutherford Hayes' children at the White House when they went to social events. The bullet that killed him was never found, not even during the autopsy. He served in the same infantry regiment as President Hayes during the Civil War. His trademark good luck charm was a red carnation, which he gave away to a 12-year-old girl right before he was assassinated at a public reception in Buffalo, New York. He was the first president to ride in both an automobile and an electric vehicle. The electric vehicle was the ambulance that took him to the hospital after he was shot. He was the first president to be captured on film. Theodore Roosevelt. A young Theodore Roosevelt watched his political idol Abraham Lincoln's funeral with his brother from a second-story window in Washington, D.C., and we have a photograph of this. How crazy is that? He would later wear a ring with a lock of Lincoln's hair, his favorite president, inside of it during his presidential inauguration. During his 1912 campaign, he was shot by a would-be assassin from 5 feet away. Instead of going to the hospital, he proceeded to give the 90-minute speech after correctly assessing that the bullet missed his lung. His presidential pets included blue macaw, a pig, a hyena, a one-legged rooster, a lizard, a pony, and a bear. His son Quentin died in combat during World War I. And his son Theodore Roosevelt Jr. died during the Allied liberation of France in World War II, although from a heart attack, not combat. Here's a picture I took of his grave while I was there. He once had his boat stolen by 3 thieves, so he built a new boat and traveled over 300 miles to track them down and capture them, which he did successfully. Upon his death in 1919, Vice President Thomas Marshall declared death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight. William Howard Taft. The story about William Howard Taft getting stuck in a bathtub is fake news. He did have a custom-made bathtub, but there's no evidence to suggest that he ever got stuck in one. He's the only former president to become a Supreme Court justice, which he believed was his true calling.
He was the last president to keep a cow at the White House to provide fresh milk every morning. A man named Carl Panzram broke into Taft's house in 1920 and stole his gun. He became a serial killer and murdered at least 10 people with Taft's weapon. He was the final president to have any sort of facial hair throughout his presidency. He was the first president to meet with the president of Mexico, who was Porfirio Diaz at the time. Both men were bilingual and did not need interpreters. In his post-presidency, Taft put a great deal of focus into his health and lost over 150 pounds. Pretty impressive.
Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson had a mustache when he was younger because he shaved off because people couldn't tell if he was joking or being serious when he was talking. He's the only president to have a PhD, and he's the only president to be buried in Washington, D.C. He's the first president to visit the United Kingdom while in office. For about a year and a half at the end of his presidency after suffering a stroke, his wife Edith Wilson took on most of the duties of president and is believed to have forged his signature and made significant governing decisions. Check out my most recent video on obscure fake American presidents if you're interested in more on that story. His first name was actually Thomas, and he went by his middle name Woodrow because he believed it sounded more dignified. Sure, man. He was thought to be dyslexic and didn't learn to read or write until he was 10 years old.
Warren G. Harding.
Mount Jerry was the nickname for Warren G. Harding's, junk. The only child he had was fathered outside of his marriage and only confirmed through a DNA test long after Harding died. Another mistress that he had, different from the one that he fathered a child with, was paid $25,000 by the Republican Party to keep quiet during Harding's campaign. He was the first president to speak on the radio and install one inside the White House. He was also the first president to make an official visit to Canada, just a week before he died. He once gambled away a set of White House china in a game of poker that dated back to Benjamin Harrison. His dog Laddie Boy was so popular that he was interviewed for the Evening Star in 1921.
Calvin Coolidge.
While Calvin Coolidge was president, he woke up to a burglar in his hotel room and gave him $32 after realizing that he was a desperate student just needing money to travel home. He had a pet raccoon that was originally sent to him to be eaten, but he refused to do so. I wonder how that would taste. As a prank, he used to ring the emergency bell in the White House and hide as the Secret Service tried to look for him. He has an official Native American name given to him by the Sioux tribe, which translates to Great Leading Eagle. He was the only former lieutenant governor to later become president. Every morning as president, he would eat breakfast in bed and have a White House staffer rub Vaseline on his head. After his predecessor Warren Harding died, Coolidge took his oath of office from his father in his family home in the early morning hours and then went back to bed because he was tired.
Herbert Hoover.
Herbert Hoover and his wife would speak in Mandarin when they felt like someone was eavesdropping on them. They were both fluent. He was the first president born west of the Mississippi River. He was alive long enough to hypothetically have met every president from Andrew Johnson all the way to Donald Trump. A sport called Hoover ball was created and named after him by his physician to keep him in shape while he was president. His last known written words were a get well soon message to his friend, President Harry Truman, who had slipped in a bathroom and gotten injured. He died on the same day that future Vice President Kamala Harris was born. His official portrait was not completed until 23 years after he left office.
Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Franklin D. Roosevelt was given a BB gun for his 11th birthday that he used to shoot and stuff over 300 different bird species. A 12-year-old Fidel Castro once wrote a letter to FDR requesting an American $10 bill. In the New Deal, he called for a new tax bracket on people who earned over $5 million. This affected a total of one person at the time, John D. Rockefeller. He once proposed an international system called the Four Policemen, where the USA, UK, USSR, and China would be the only 4 countries on the planet allowed to possess a weapon more powerful than a rifle. He was once given a letter opener made from a Japanese soldier's arm as a gift. Pretty gruesome. He was only 39 years old when he first contracted polio. His wife Eleanor's maiden name was also Roosevelt. They were 5th cousins once removed, so essentially not related at all, but she was the niece of Theodore Roosevelt from the other branch of the Roosevelt family.
Harry S. Truman.
Harry Truman was the only president to see combat in World War I. After leaving office, he was broke due to refusing to join any corporate boards or commercial endorsements. Congress passed the Former President's Act to pay him a pension. He was so nearsighted that he had to cheat by memorizing the Army's eye chart to fight in World War I. He seriously considered a run for a 3rd term in 1952. He was exempt from the new 22nd Amendment limiting presidential terms and the final president who could have ran for a 3rd if he wanted to. He fell in love with his future wife at Sunday school when he was 6 years old and she was 5. He once sent a letter on an official White House letterhead threatening to beat up a music critic who disliked his daughter's music.
He briefly considered becoming a member of the KKK to help him win a judicial election. However, he retracted his membership fee when he found out about their anti-Catholic stances. During his presidency and later on in life, he strongly opposed the views of the KKK. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Dwight Eisenhower was the only president to balance the budget during every single year of his administration. Despite being a general and serving in World War I and World War II, he was never on an active battlefield. In the lead up to D-Day, Eisenhower was smoking 6 packs of cigarettes and drinking 24 cups of coffee a day because he was so stressed out. He wanted to attend his son's graduation from West Point on June 6, 1944, but he was a little tied up with leading the Allied invasion of Normandy that day. He had at least 7 heart attacks that we know of, including one during his presidency. One of Eisenhower's grandsons married Richard Nixon's daughter. Eisenhower's interstate highway system was the most expensive megaproject in history, costing over $600 billion in today's money.
John F. Kennedy.
Before imposing a Cuban trade embargo in 1962, John F. Kennedy ordered 1,200 Cuban cigars for himself. He was allergic to cats, dogs, and horses, but was still an avid animal lover. He's the only president to ever receive a Purple Heart Medal. Sorry, John Kerry, you didn't quite get there. He was addicted to methamphetamine that he used to relieve his severe back pain. When Neville Chamberlain declared war on Nazi Germany in 1939, a young JFK was in attendance at the public gallery in the House of Commons. After his autopsy, his brain was removed and stored in the National Archive. However, the brain mysteriously went missing soon after and remains lost to this day. He has a mountain named after him in Canada that was picked out to honor him after his assassination.
Lyndon B. Johnson.
The ring that Lyndon B. Johnson bought to propose to his wife cost $2.50 from Sears. He had a button on his desk in the Oval Office that he could press for someone to bring him a Fresca. There was a lot of evidence pointing to him stealing the 1948 Senate Democratic primary runoff election in Texas, which he won by just 87 votes. He also had a nickname for his junk similar to Warren Harding, this time Jumbo. In 1968, he was told by his doctor that he would die in 5 years at the age of 64. This made Johnson decide not to run for re-election, and sure enough, he died 5 years later at the age of 64. He reportedly smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day during his time in the Senate. He once urinated on a Secret Service man just because he was the president and he could.
Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon's favorite Mexican restaurant in Orange County has a chair specifically designed for him. He wanted his daughter to marry King Charles III. When he resigned from office, he became the only living former president until Gerald Ford left office in 1977. He was offered a full scholarship to Harvard, but did not attend because his family could not afford the travel costs and the room and board. The US Senate used the exact same gavel from 1789 all the way to 1954, when Nixon finally broke it during a heated debate on nuclear energy. He enjoyed rap music quite a bit, and once joked that he would have considered a musical career in a rap group had they been around in his youth. He's the only person in United States history to be elected president and vice president twice each.
Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford was the first and only Eagle Scout to become president. He received professional football offers from the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers out of college, but decided to pursue a career in politics instead. His birth name was Leslie Lynch King Jr., and he didn't take the name Gerald Ford until he was an adult. His administration hired Shirley Temple as a diplomat. She was later considered as a running mate for him in the 1976 election. He originally intended on retiring from the House of Representatives in 1976, and upon getting the offer to be the vice president in 1973, he told his wife it would be a nice conclusion to his political career. Little did he know, he would be president soon after. His presidency was a big issue for political cartoonists because his features were so nondescript that they didn't know what to exaggerate when drawing him. The only 2 presidential assassination attempts by women in American history were both on Gerald Ford's life. One of the assassins died just a few weeks ago.
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter's son smoked weed with Willie Nelson on the roof of the White House. He was the first president to be born in a hospital. Every president after him has been born in a hospital too, so far. He was the longest-lived president and had the longest post-presidency. He was the first president to ever serve a full term and not nominate any justices to the Supreme Court. He personally built most of his family's furniture for their Georgia home. He was the first president to have his inauguration televised live. He was the only president to receive the Nobel Peace Prize after leaving office.
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan ended a superstitious pattern known as the Curse of Tippecanoe in American history, in which every president elected in a year ending in 0, starting with William Henry Harrison, either died in office or was assassinated. Reagan was elected in 1980 and served a full 2 terms just fine, although he did have a close call with an assassination attempt. Speaking of that attempt, an aide of his claimed that he carried around a .38 caliber pistol in his briefcase after the attempt, although this is unconfirmed. Reagan started snacking on jelly beans that he kept all around the White House in order to quit smoking. He saved the lives of nearly 80 people during his 7 years as a lifeguard in his youth, which he fondly remembered as one of his favorite jobs. In 1981, he fired 11,359 air traffic controllers on strike and banned them from working a federal job for the rest of their lives. In the 1984 election, he won the most states in history at 49 and the most electoral votes at 525. He lost Minnesota by less than 0.2% and chose not to campaign there because it was his opponent, Walter Mondale's home state. While going into surgery after he was shot in an assassination attempt, the first thing he said to the doctors was, "Please tell me you're all Republicans."
George H.W. Bush.
George H.W. Bush was on the Yale baseball team and got to meet Babe Ruth when he paid a visit. He was once given a 9-foot-long Komodo dragon as a gift from the Indonesian government. His oil company was named after his favorite movie, Viva Zapata. He briefly considered none other than Clint Eastwood to be his vice presidential pick. He once vomited on the lap of the Japanese prime minister during a state visit in 1992. The Japanese now have an expression for this. He was the first president to issue a pardon to a turkey for Thanksgiving, a tradition held to this day. He once held the record for the youngest pilot in the Navy at age 18.
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton's dad was married 5 times and died at the age of 28. His birth name was actually William Jefferson Blythe III. He's a direct descendant of King Robert I of France. When he was just 16, he got to meet his idol John F. Kennedy. Kennedy died only a few months later. He was advised by Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam to not address the nation on the suicide of Kurt Cobain because he thought it might inspire copycat incidents. He was the first president to send an email, but only sent 2 throughout his entire administration. One of the 2 was to see if he could do it right. In 1996, the Secret Service uncovered a plot to assassinate Clinton in the Philippines, masterminded by none other than the infamous Osama bin Laden.
George W. Bush.
George W. Bush once fainted after choking on a pretzel in 2002. He's also the only president to be the father of twins. He was arrested for driving under the influence in 1976. In the late 1960s, he went on a first date with Richard Nixon's daughter that did not go so well. He holds the record for both the highest and lowest presidential approval ratings ever recorded. Ironic. He was the head cheerleader during his senior year of high school. He read 14 biographies of Abraham Lincoln during his presidency.
Barack Obama.
Barack Obama earned a green belt in Taekwondo while he was serving as a senator. He received about 10,000 letters a day as president and tried to read and respond to 10 each day. He had the first presidential portrait taken with a digital camera. He used to have a podcast with Bruce Springsteen. He hasn't eaten ice cream since he worked at Baskin-Robbins as a teenager in Hawaii because he was so sick of it. He had a basketball court placed on the White House tennis courts while he was president. He was the first president to ever brew beer inside of the White House.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump's first visit to another country as president was to Saudi Arabia. He was the first Republican to win an election in 88 years without a Nixon or a Bush on the ticket. In 1999, he proposed a one-time wealth tax of 14.25% on everyone worth $10 million or more. I'm not sure if that would tide over so well today. He once tried to sue an author for $5 billion because the author called him a millionaire instead of a billionaire. He once tried to trademark his famous line, "You're fired." He was actually a registered Democrat from 2001 to 2009. Before that, he was a member of Ross Perot's Reform Party. He was the only president to be married more than 2 times.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden was the only vice president to serve 2 terms and never cast a tiebreaker vote. He was also the first Catholic vice president and the second Catholic president after John F. Kennedy. He was born closer to Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration than his own. He was the oldest president ever when sworn in, but only the 13th oldest world leader in 2021. His political career was longer than the entire lives of 2 other presidents, JFK and James Garfield. He once got a phone call from Richard Nixon sending his condolences for his wife and daughter who sadly passed away in a car accident in 1972, just weeks before he was sworn in as a senator. He ran for president 4 times, 1988, 2008, 2020, and 2004. Only one of those 4 runs was successful, 2020 of course.
Donald Trump.
Going back to Donald Trump because, like Grover Cleveland, he was technically president twice. He claims to have never had an alcoholic beverage in his life. He's the only president to have never worked in the public sector prior to his presidency. He met every president from Richard Nixon to himself with the exception of Gerald Ford. He was not the only president to be arrested after being elected. Grant was too when he got a speeding ticket in 1872. Donald Trump does not like to eat at non-chain restaurants. Him and Ronald Reagan are the only presidents to have stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His favorite movie is Citizen Kane.
So there you have it. Did you learn something new, or did you somehow know every last one of these? I know at least one of my viewers did. If you liked what you saw today, consider checking out some of my other president videos. October is President's Month here on Bay State History, and this is the 3rd out of 5 videos I'm planning to make about American presidents each week this month. I'm super excited for what's in store for the next 2 weeks. I hope to see you there. This is Bay State History, signing off.